along with the principle of balance, we also discuss symmetry, and they are two very different things. So, balance is visual weight of art elements. So, talking about Frida Kahlo's work specifically, we talked about how we had this black chunk here and a black chunk here. So, a monkey and a cat are very different, but they take about the same amount of space, and that's why it was visually balanced. Okay. We also discussed James Whistler, Jackson Pollock, how things were evenly throughout the whole thing. We talked about Notre Dame's cathedral, how things were able to be turned and rotated. Everything's about the same size, how it's nice radial symmetry. We talked about three different types of symmetry, which are very different from balance. Balance is visual weight, okay? Things do not have to be symmetrical to have balance. The three different types of symmetry we discussed first was bilateral symmetry, and that's the one that you're probably most familiar with, things being able to be the same on both sides, such as these boots right here. I draw a line down the middle, it's the same on both sides, okay? Like mirror images. Then we have radial symmetry. We have a design that if I rotate it, it looks the same almost, no matter how many times I rotate it. Okay, so that's something that's really cool. We discussed radial symmetry when we talked about Notre Dame's cathedral, specifically this window, how being able to rotate it. It's kind of like a bicycle wheel or about like a pizza, how it can be rotated. And then we also talked about asymmetry and how that's basically the lack of symmetry. I divide it in half, it's not the same. I divide it in half and not the same. Divide it, it's not the same. It just doesn't have symmetry. Does that mean it doesn't have balance? No, not necessarily, okay? Things can be asymmetrical and still have balance, such as James Whistler's painting. We talked about, well, you can't divide it in half, okay? It still has balance. We have this big black chunk here was balanced out by the white image. So there are some things that have balance that don't have symmetry, which is an interesting concept, okay? So here is your worksheet. Make sure you put your name at the top. And here's the definition of balance right here, the visual weight of art elements, and then here's bilateral, radial, and then asymmetrical are the three different types of symmetry. So there's two different things that you need to complete with this first section right here, okay? Thing number one is you are going to be identifying the art element that is being used in each of these images. So are you seeing line being used, shape, color, texture, value, space, form? Okay, those are the 7 art elements that we have been discussing over the last several weeks. And which one do you see being used? Okay, that's the first part, is identifying the art element being used in each image to create balance, because all of these have balance. Okay, they all have balance, that I know for sure. But what art element is being used? The second thing you need to do is identify what type of symmetry do you see. Do you see bilateral symmetry, radial symmetry, or asymmetry? So your label is going to look something like this, okay? You're going to write down an art element like line, and then you're going to write down B, an R, or an A for bilateral, radial, or asymmetrical. So then I know that you can identify not just the art element being used, but also what type of symmetry that you see being used. Okay, so 2 things that you need to have in that top half. Bottom half is where you start creating your own symmetry. And I have some examples that I'm actually going to share with you guys. So make sure you don't copy examples, because that's a good way for me not to count it for you. So come up with your own ideas, right? So here I have my example with bilateral symmetry. You can divide it in half, as the same on both sides, okay? Then we got radial symmetry, okay? Rotational symmetry. We got asymmetry, and then we also have balance using colors. So it can be any kind of symmetry for this one. So this could be bilateral, radial, asymmetry. You can do any kind of symmetry here as long as you are using color. I don't mind how you are creating your symmetry. Okay, so if you have any other questions about this assignment, make sure you let me know.